This whiskey right here is all Irish all the time. This week, let me tell you about the full Irish whiskey from the Blackwater Distillery. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this week I'm looking at the full Irish whiskey from Blackwater. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now, I have talked about Blackwater Distillery on the channel before, but up to now they've mostly been doing like sourced whiskey. So what they've done is like their velvet cap whiskeys, which I reviewed before. I'll put a link up there, I'll put a link down below. They were sourcing those whiskies and they were just kind of putting out nice whiskies while they did these whiskies right here, because they're quite an experimental distillery. I have reviewed one of their putcheons, again there'll be a link down below, I'll see if I put a link to that up above, where they kind of use seaweed, they used kelp, they made a really kind of, they called it I think the Son of the Sea putcheon. It was a really nice putcheon, very experimental, but today we're talking about this here, right here, which is whiskey. This is a relatively limited edition whiskey. I mean, I just checked on their website before I started filming. It is still available on their website, you can buy, but this is like I won't say I think a single cask, but it is a special edition, limited edition release. They might do it again in future, but this here is a bit of a limited release. Now, they have done some other limited edition releases before, and they're going to continue doing some limited releases in the next year, over the course of 2024, with what they call heritage pot stills, which are the kind of pot still whiskies that don't conform to the modern kind of strict definition of what a pot still can be, but they use like historic recipes of what people used to use to make pot still Irish whiskey. Some of those are pretty close to like the modern day definition, some of them are very far away from that modern definition, but they are kind of in that range of what Irish whiskey is kind of true to, what the kind of classic Irish whiskey was. Now, next year, 2025, they intend to have a 5-year-old permanent whiskey. So they, like a lot of distilleries, are doing kind of limited edition releases while they build up the stock of their whiskey matured, so they can have a kind of a core product. They're hoping to have that out next year. Again, it's a heritage pot still, heritage style of whiskey, that traditional style of whiskey, with some more single cask releases on the way. But right here today, let's talk with this whiskey, this one right in front of us, which is the Full Irish. It says on the back quite clearly, you can even see this kind of hand here holding all the grains, that it's got all the grains, all the styles, double distilled and rested in stout casks. So that's the idea of it being the full Irish whiskey, because it uses all Irish grains. It's aged in a stout cask, which is a very Irish style of beer. It's like kind of bitter, kind of sharp, kind of nice. It's a Guinness. If you've ever seen a Guinness, that's kind of what, I'll put a picture of it there if you're not familiar with what a stout is. That's kind of what you're looking at. It's been double distilled, so it's gonna have a bit of a richer, denser flavor than like a triple distilled whiskey, but still gonna be quite nice and full flavored. And it has all the styles, so this is a blended whiskey. So all the styles, what they mean is, it's got malt whiskey, which is 100% single malt. It's got pot still whiskey, which I'll come back to in a second. And it's got grain whiskey. Grain whiskey here, in this case, was sourced from the Great Northern Distillery up in Northern Ireland. Grain whiskey from them, I think it comes in at like 90-95% corn with 5 to 10% of that malted barley to give it, kind of to allow it to mature, to allow it to what's the word, to ferment and to age and do all those kind of processes you need to turn it into whiskey. So this here is a all the styles blend. So that pot still though is very important. So this whiskey here is 45% pot still whiskey, 45% malt whiskey, and 10% grain whiskey. So the grain whiskey is 7-year-old single grain. The other two styles are 5%. And I'm going to give you a breakdown of their pot still, because it is actually quite complicated, quite precise, but it should give us a nice good flavor. It is 60.8% malted barley, 32.4% raw barley, just regular barley or unmalted barley, 2% turf smoked malt, 1.6% each of rye, wheat and oat. So it is at 4.8% of the other grains, because pot still whiskey has to be at least 30% malted barley, at least 30% unmalted barley, and at most 5% other grains. So they've kind of gone in and they've gone to 4.8% of those other grains to give them a big lot of flavor from those other grains without going over the limit and not being able to call it pot still whiskey. The pot still whiskey and the malt whiskey spent about 4 years, so I think I said 5 years more, spent 4 years in casks. The malted whiskey spent about 4 years in, I think, a bourbon cask, and the pot still spent 4 years in a rye cask, and the single grain whiskey would again been 7 years in a bourbon cask. So it's between 4 and 7 years old, but importantly they also spent 7 months at the end finishing in a stout cask from the Hopfully Brewing beer company in Waterford, which is where this distillery is. So I think that's all the information about it that I've got. Like, they're pretty transparent. They give a lot of information on the bottle and on their website, but I just sent them a message. They answered a bunch of questions for me, so they are quite transparent about what they're doing. I think that's all there is I have to say about it. So I think I'm gonna go in for the nose on this whiskey right here. Cheers. Okay, it's immediately very, almost like, I don't want to say like fizzy, but that kind of like effervescent. Like, it's got this really nice bright zesty character coming out of the nose of it immediately. Like, it reminds me almost of like a lemon sherbet. Like, you can see I've had a good bit of this whiskey already. Like, it reminds me of kind of rye spice mixed with like a lemon sherbet. Like, it's got this bright zesty character to it, but still some herbal notes behind that, kind of backing it all up. There's some like nice zesty green apple note as well coming through. Like, it's got this nice, almost like, yeah, like a Granny Smith apple, like something a little tart but not sharp, like still quite sweet coming through there. It's got some nice like green apple notes coming through, almost like a Granny Smith apple, where it's almost a little bit tart, but at the same time, like, it's still sweet. It's still got that sweetness of the apple, but again with that kind of tart character coming through there on the nose there. You got a little bit of the green apple. Like, also I'm getting like vanilla, and so this is going to be a type of soda that not many people know about. I'll put a picture of it up there, but it should just be like a clear white soda, a cream soda. So I know some people in America, Canada, Ireland, England, New Zealand, Australia have cream sodas, where it's just like, it's like this vanilla flavored like soda, a vanilla flavored drink, sometimes with a little bit of lemon, sometimes with a little bit of citrus in there. And that's kind of what it reminds me of. It's got this like effervescence, it's got this kind of fizziness with some vanilla coming through. So you get that like cream soda vibe coming through here on the nose. There's still like classic, you're going to get like that malted barley, you're going to get the caramel, but that's all like at the base. Like, I'm getting that rye flavor, I'm getting the effervescence I think comes from the wheat. I'm getting all that flavor coming through. There's a little bit of oak, but not a huge amount of oak influence. Like, there's a little bit of like, yeah, that oak character, a little bit of oak spiciness, but not a huge amount. I think it's all coming from like that grain flavor. I mean, on there, you can see it here, the hand holding the grains, their little hand up here on top. Their motto is "Let the grain reign," as in let the grain speak for itself, and I think that's what it's doing here. I'm getting the pot still, I'm getting that sweetness I think from the grain whiskey, I'm getting the kind of core caramel base from the malted whiskey. And it's just, yeah, it's very grain forward in a way that's enjoyable. It does come together. I'm not getting like, oh, there's the rye. I'm getting a little bit, I'm getting the rye from the rye cask, but I'm not getting, oh, there's the oat, there's the wheat, there's the, there's the barley. I'm not getting that immediately on the nose. So let's go in for the palate and see if that changes. Cheers. It starts off light in the palate. Like, you get this nice light flavor there, but then you get this big hit of like that zesty, like again, that fizzy kind of character I was talking about earlier. A nice big bit of caramel and a lot of like white pepper. I don't know if I'd say black pepper, but definitely some white pepper coming through, a bit of creaminess as well, a bit of richness coming through, and I think that's your character from those grains coming through. Because oat, if you use it in a whiskey, you get this almost like porridge, almost like oatmeal, this rich, creamy character comes through into the whiskey. I think that's carried here into the palate, where you get this initial hit of sweetness, and as it spreads out, you get that creaminess, you get that richness, like the thickness comes through on the palate with all that zestiness, the caramel, the maybe not green apple, but definitely that lemon citrus that comes through, a bit of oak as well, character coming through on the palate. So I'm going to go in for a second sip, see what else I can find. Cheers. Okay, I let it sit there in my palate for a bit, kind of chewing it, kind of enjoying it, and I definitely get a little bit more of the stout character coming through. So stout, if you've ever had a stout, you know it's a little bit bitter, but in a pleasant way. It's got this like bite to it. It's got this little bit of like sharpness. If you ever take a sip of a stout, you know, oh, it's quite sharp, it's quite stouty. But then if you take a bigger gulp, you get that creamy character. You get that kind of the cooked grains, maybe not cooked, roasted and toasted and really like heavily cooked grains. You get that flavor coming through. In addition to, again, that nice rich creaminess, that oat character coming through. It's quite enjoyable whiskey. I'd say the mouthfeel is like medium. I wouldn't say it's super heavy on the pot still oiliness, but at the same time, it's not super light like a grain whiskey. I'm not getting any peat character coming through. Now, 2% of the pot still was peated whiskey, but that's 2% of 45% of the whiskey. So less than 1% of the whiskey, of the grains used in here, is peated grains, or is turf smoked grains, to use the way they describe it. But that's not really coming through. But for me, sometimes when you use a little bit of peat, or use a little touch of peat in a whiskey, you get this rounding out. Like, it doesn't give you the smoke, but it just helps to round out some of the flavors. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting here with those roasted grains, with that little bit of oak character, with that maybe the roundness of the peat coming through, in addition to the creamy character of that oat, and that nice spicy, zesty, almost fizzy character from the rye and the other flavor. So maybe from the wheat as well. So I'm going to go in again, focus on the finish, and see how it is. Cheers. Okay, so I'll say on the finish, quite nice. I'd say it's medium on the finish. Like, it's up front, like I said, you get that big hit of like creaminess and that fizziness. The fizziness almost fades off a little bit, leaving you with that creamy character. So some of the notes don't hang around long, some of the notes hang around a lot longer. Like that creaminess, as I'm talking now, a bit of vanilla, a bit of like roasted hazelnuts, a bit of like actually like a vanilla pudding, that kind of like creaminess coming through, really heavy, really dense, that kind of flavor coming through on the palate. A little bit of like oak tannins, maybe like a little bit of that stout influence as well, that creamy but slightly bitter character coming through on the finish. Like, there's no alcohol burn on this. I mean, it comes in at don't think I said it earlier, it comes in at 48.5% alcohol by volume, with it's non-chill filtered, it's no color added, it's completely natural. This is what the whiskey looks like. There's no alcohol burn. It's quite well incorporated. Again, as I'm talking, still almost that nuttiness coming through more than the vanilla and the toffee. Like, it's like I know I've had something like it before, where almost like a I don't know how to describe, like a caramel with like a hazelnut in it, like where you actually quite like that, like a caramel sweet with a hazelnut in the middle. You bite it, you get the flavor of the nut, but also you get that sweetness of the caramel, that kind of creaminess. That's lingering on now for me into the finish. So it's, I say, medium to medium long on the finish. Before I give my final thoughts on this whiskey, let me know down below in the comments below if you've ever tried anything from Blackwater, or if you're looking forward to seeing their release in future of that core 5-year-old product that they're hoping to release. I put out whiskey reviews like this every Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday. So if you want to see those, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and you'll see more videos. But right now, onto this one. I like it. It's hard for me to put my finger on a specific note. So some whiskeys I can say, oh, it's the biscuity note, oh, it's the appley note. There's one defining note on it. This here, not a single defining note. It's except for like the grains. Like, you got the fizzy barley, the kind of the fizzy oak, the rye spice, the herbal character up front in the palate, up front of the nose, into the palate. You still get that spiciness, but then you get like the vanilla, you get the creaminess, and you get the stout influence of the casks into the palate, and then the finish you get that creaminess, the almost nuttiness, that kind of lingers on to the finish. So it's hard to describe what flavor there is except for grains all the way through. It is a really interesting whiskey. I mean, I tried this at Whiskey Live Dublin as like a pre-release. I tried it there. I really did like it. I mean, don't get me wrong, while I'm saying it's hard for me to nail down what this whiskey is, I really like it. It's really nice, it's really fun to see experimental whiskies coming on in a way that actually tastes nice. So Blackwater are doing it, a couple other distilleries are also doing it. I think the next couple of years are going to be very exciting for Irish whiskey, where we get like these experimental distilleries that come into 5 to 6 to 7 years old, and they're going to have whiskey that is nicely matured, that they can have a core release of, and it's all going to be different. It's not going to be the same stuff we get out of Middleton, the same stuff we get out of Great Northern, at Cooley and Bushmills. There's going to be a lot of distilleries all making different whiskies. Some of them won't work, some of them will. I think this is one of the ones that will work, and it's just good to see the future of Irish whiskey being in good hands. But I think that's all there is to say about this whiskey. If you want to see more videos, like I said, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But right now, I'm going to keep on enjoying it, and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.